So, who in here has at least heard of HipHop? Yes, okay. None of you know what it is. Well, no, some of you might. I'm going to go over some of the history of HipHop, what kind of convinced Facebook that we needed to create it and use it, and why what you're thinking of as HipHop probably isn't what it is. When we introduced HipHop years ago, it was a very different product. It's changed a lot, so we're going to go over a little bit of that. So to start with, what kind of problem are we trying to solve? Facebook just recently announced that we've gone over 1 billion monthly active users. That's like people actually interacting with a site, not just accounts. That's a lot of activity. We have servers running that site. It takes a lot of power, network bandwidth, all that sort of thing. It's the sort of thing that you hit a scale that you just say, we literally can't keep throwing servers at this problem. It's going to just break the entire site eventually. Probably not a lot of your sites are at that scale, but they are at some scale. You maybe have a few hundred or even a few thousand servers running your site. You might even only have a few dozen. You might just have a couple of EC2 instances, but you don't want to make that grow too fast. Why do we need so many servers? We need it because of some of the inefficiencies that are just inherent to PHP and the kind of language and runtime that it is. We have to do a lot of data copy. So I should mention, I'm also a developer on the PHP project. So when I think of inefficiencies, I think of things like, oh, we've got a system allocated block of memory. It needs to go into engine allocated blocks. And we need to purposelessly copy all this extra data over where it doesn't need to be. So that's sort of the gestalt of the problem there. So how do you fix that problem? Well, rebuilding your engine and your runtime from scratch is not the first thing you should be doing. The first thing you should be doing is all the easy stuff. And I don't need to tell anyone in this room what those easy things are. Databases are going to be half of your bottleneck right off the bat. You know how to make your code better. So I'm not going to go into that. Eventually, though, you run out of those easy things, and all that you're left with is your actual language and your runtime and all of the extra work that's being done that doesn't have to be done. So these are, again, just kind of a rehash of some of those same problems that I just mentioned. You've got multiple processes running because you don't really trust Apache 2 worker to work nicely with PHP. I know in theory it's supposed to work, but how many people are actually running PHP with Apache 2 in the worker NPM? 0. That's what I thought. Because none of us trust it. So when PHP is a problem, what's our solution? Our solution is we decided we were going to rewrite the entire PHP engine and runtime from the ground up, and we were going to use some lessons learned from both the PHP project itself and from kind of what we know about how we use PHP. That's the official explanation. The real explanation is actually something more like one of the engineers at Facebook just didn't like PHP, and he wanted to convert the whole site to C++. What better way to do it than to just write an autoconverter? That's why the original version of HipHop was just this source transformer. And I'll talk about that in a couple later slides. One of the side effects of this, though, is that we've actually removed Apache from our stack completely. This is not to say that Apache is bad. Apache is a great web server. I love the Apache web server. I love the community that is around the Apache web server. But it is a gigantic Swiss Army knife when all you need is a corkscrew. So we've got a web server that's very thin, very lean, does what we need to do, and does what most sites need to do. Obviously, there's going to be a few things that it doesn't support, and that's unfortunate. The good news is we are actually in the process of building out our SAPI layer so that we can plug into Apache or any fast CGI web server. That's coming along in the coming year. We don't have an ETA for that yet. What you see on the right here is an example of what a configuration for our web server looks like. The structure's a lot different than Apache, but fundamentally the settings are all basically the same. We're telling it where to find our files. We're setting up some virtual hosts. Not in this example, but never mind. We're specifying some log files. This is all basic web server setup stuff. So I promised to get into the history of HipHop a little bit. This was our first version, the compiler. This would take your PHP source, translate it just literally line for line into C++, and then toss it off to make. Now, this was a nice, easy thing to do. It sort of fits into the done is better than perfect philosophy. Unfortunately, to build all of the Facebook web code base takes, this number is kind of a fuzzy thing because it depends on how many build machines we're pushing it out to, but it's on the order of 20+ minutes spread across more than 100 machines. This is completely impractical for the average developer because you're not going to assign 100 build machines per developer. And it is, even then, 20 minutes to do a single change to some file and just see that it works is not acceptable. So how do we deal with development? Well, it's fine. We'll just let our regular developers use the Apache PHP environment, which I'll refer to as ape for the rest of this. And for production, we'll do HPHPC. And that'll be fine. That'll be great. Except it won't be, because now PHP is not PHP. You might write something that works perfectly fine under ape, crashes, fails, fatals, dies, does unexpected things under production. So, and plus we're adding new features to the language as we're developing it, since we now control our entire runtime stack. We've added things like XHP and generators, which granted have since reached regular PHP. Well, generators have. XHP is actually exposed as an extension. But it's still not the same language, even under the best circumstances. And we don't have the best circumstances because we haven't re-implemented the entire runtime. So here's a fix. We're going to take our abstract syntax tree that we're already parsing using HPHPC, and we're just going to run through it line by line, not worrying about, caching or turning into bytecodes or anything like that. This is basically how PHP 2 ran. If anyone in here used PHP 2? Not surprising. PHP wasn't quite that popular at that point, but this is slow on the best of days, but hey, it's just development, so if it takes an extra 1,000 milliseconds, no big deal. Trouble is, it's still not quite HPHPC. There's still some minor differences in the language. It still doesn't quite behave exactly right. So that brings us to sort of version 2 of HipHop, and that is HHVM. This was built with a lot more knowledge of how do we want to be using this for development, and what can we do to actually get this to perform at the same kind of level as something that's basically C++ that's being built with make. And what do? We copied PHP. We compile everything to bytecode. We shove that into a cache, kind of like APC's got. And we run that bytecode through a virtual machine saying, oh, here's an echo statement, here's blah, 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 blah. And not surprisingly, we're about on par with PHP 5 using just this approach. Then we throw a JIT on top of that. The JIT is going to say, all right, let this code run through the virtual machine, let the bytecodes execute a few times until we kind of get an idea of what's going on in this code. Is $A usually an integer? Okay, great. We're going to kind of flag that as predictably an integer. Is this if statement usually returning false? Okay, we're going to optimize for the else case, and we're going to shove the if case off in another direction. We get that sort of information as we're running it a few times, and eventually we decide, okay, we know what is going on inside this translation unit. Translation unit being basically a function, but not quite. We're going to compile that all the way down to x86 code, and this is going to run as native code as if we've passed it to GCC, even though GCC is never actually involved. We're actually hand-making the instructions. And then the last thing we do on top of that is we actually take the compilation step out of the picture. Well, not entirely. This is repo authoritative mode. In this mode, when we're ready to go to production, we pass all the source code for the entire project into HHVM. It builds all the bytecodes ahead of time, and it does some deeper analysis on them, stores them in a database, and now we're basically in APC no stat mode. We're never going to the disk to look at source code. We're never compiling that source code to bytecode during runtime. We've got our bytecode already. We still want to run through it a few times before we actually turn it into native, but we can do that step pretty quick, so we're not too concerned about optimizing that all the way out. In practice, this gets us like an extra 10% boost just for doing the pre-analysis. So that's where we are today. All of our production traffic as of a month ago has been moved to HHVM. We were using HPHPC for a couple of years before that. We are already 10% faster than HPHPC. This means fewer servers. We're at about a 500% performance gain over regular PHP, and I put a big asterisk by that. I hope you see the asterisk there. This is extremely code-base dependent. HipHop is technically tailored to the Facebook code base, so we see our best performance gains on that PHP code base. If you run it against something stock like WordPress, which is actually our main testing platform right now, you only see about a 100% performance improvement. And I say only. That means you can run on half as many servers, so that's still not bad. If you still want to get at HPHPC, in a few weeks, when I start to remove the last bits of HPHPC from the HipHop repository, I'm going to make a branch. You can still get at that if you care about it. I don't recommend using it. HHVM is just the new hotness, and there's a lot of room left for performance gains. We're actually targeting an extra 50% gain by the end of the year. So that's sort of like the theoretical background of welcome to HipHop. How do you actually do something with it? Unfortunately, our documentation is kind of not very good right now. That's one of the things we're working on. But getting a server up and running is a fairly short set of steps if you're the right kind of user. And I say the right kind of user because right now, our dependencies on external packages are really tight. We need like the most recent version of thread building blocks. We need a really recent version of GCC. We need a really recent version of Folly. We need very recent versions of a lot of packages. Ubuntu satisfies those. So that's our kind of official platform right now. And you can just do these 3 steps on the left here to get an installation running really quickly. If you're on another platform, then may God have mercy on your soul. You will have to compile a few things from source. There's a wiki that describes what packages you need, where to get them from, but it is painful. It will get less painful once we remove the last bits of HPHPC. They are kind of creating this maintenance nightmare for us right now, and that is going to happen in the next few weeks. They're basically waiting for me to get back to the US because everything we do internally has to be coordinated with the external stuff, and I'm kind of the external person. So we looked at a brief config file earlier. This is really all you need. Kind of like a Apache setup, all you really need to do is tell it where the HTML files are. We don't actually need to say enable PHP because it's all part of a single thing. But it's kind of a crap config file. By the way, I'm not sure if you can see it. This little line down here, that's how you start up a server. It's not quite as cool as Apache CTL start, but I'm sure you can alias that. Dev config, you probably want a few extra things. You want a lot more warnings to come out of your log files. You're going to want to ignore static files. You definitely don't want to be doing PHP processing on a GIF file. A few vulnerabilities have shown up in those. For a production file, you're going to have basically that same config, but you're going to have maybe a few things tightened up. You go into repo authoritative mode. You're going to only worry about your errors, not your warnings in your log file, that sort of thing. And if you want to do repo authoritative mode, that's what this HHVM PHP line here is. This says, here's all my files, analyze them for me, give them to me in a database. And then that database becomes your repository. So there's a lot of good reasons why not HipHop. Number 1 is parity. Right now, we are 4-letter expletive for parity. We don't have namespaces. That's probably a big thing for a lot of people. We're missing a whole bunch of standard bundled extensions. Now, I look at these extensions and I think, kind of who cares for most of them? We are working on those, though. Last year was our performance push. This year is our parity push. So we're going to have a lot of people actually work on getting these extensions built. We're also improving the way, oops, not yet, the way that extensions are built for HipHop. In PHP, it's a pretty simple process. Assuming you already have the code, it's PHP-eyes configure and make. We're going to have something similar to that on HipHop. We just don't have it yet. That's another piece of the parity puzzle that we're pulling in. When we have that, hopefully we can get some people actually contributing back and building some of these extensions if they actually care. Generally speaking, they're not hard. You just copy what's in PHP, put the right license header in, and you're fine. Making extensions for HipHop, really easy. I don't know, who came to my extension writing talk yesterday? A handful of you, a dozen or so. So you'll recognize what's on top. That's writing an extension for regular PHP. What's on the bottom is writing an extension for HipHop. You're not doing this funky pulling parameters off the stack thing. Your prototype is what your prototype should be. It is this function takes 2 strings, an integer, and a bool. So it takes 2 strings, an integer, and a bool. What are the odds? And it returns an int, so it returns an int. So much easier to write extensions under HipHop. There's also, I had this slide in the wrong spot. This is actually a why PHP, not a why not PHP. Why not HipHop? There are some features we have in HipHop that are not seen in PHP right now. We, as a principle, anytime we add a new feature to the language, we offer it to the community. And we say, here you go. Here's a feature, and generally, here's an implementation of it as well. There's actually one up for voting right now about allowing trailing commas in function calls. That's something we added to HipHop, so we said, OK, here you go, PHP. Here's a patch. Not everything gets accepted, and not everything is necessarily ready to be offered yet, such as generic, strict typing, and literal collections. I'm not sure if I have an example of those yet, but in C++, generics are things like you can do template, foo, these, templates basically are an example of generics. We have a version of that in HipHop. And there's some black boxes there because there's some things we're working on I can't tell you about yet. HipHop also has this cool thing called XHP. Like I said, there is an extension available for regular PHP that'll do the same thing. But that means installing that extension. It's just sort of baked into HipHop. Who's actually seen XHP before? Just a couple of people. So XHP is basically XML for PHP. And as you can see in the example there, we don't have our HTML inside quotes. We've got actual tags in our expressions. We're saying $good equals paragraph tag, some data, and paragraph tag. Now you might say, OK, all you're doing is getting rid of the quotes, BFD. Well, there's actually more context than that. This p tag is an actual object. And it knows the difference between what is a tag, or sub-object, and what is just text. So if you have any kind of problem with cross-site scripting right now, this is going to solve 99% of that. Because look what I've done here. I've put get username directly into my HTML. That's probably an XSS no-no, right? Because the user can provide anything they want, and it'll get output straight out to the browser. Wrong. In the bottom there, $get username was set to script, alert, and tag script. That's been escaped because XHP knows that this is not a tag. This is data. So data is supposed to be escaped when it goes out to a browser context. It's also, hold on, save that for the next slide. If you really, really like cross-site scripting, you can allow it in. We've got this HTML function. We have a commit hook in the FB code that if anyone ever uses this, it requires an extra reviewer on the diff. You really shouldn't be using this, but you can if you need to. It's also very extensible. In this example, I've got some tags up there that are not real tags. They're just references to other object implementations. So I'm saying, OK, I've got a body. I want a UI menu with a title, some menu items underneath it. In some library somewhere, I've got a UI menu class defined that knows how to turn all those children and tags and subtags into HTML. This is really nice for designers, because they can put the page however they want to using just semantic knowledge about here's some data that I'm throwing in, and then the programmers can worry about actually pulling things out of databases or adding extra decoration onto the data on its way out. This is a really contrived example. I'm trying to convince our UI team to open source our UI components library. It's a really big library. It's a really awesome library. They just get nervous about new projects going out to open source. You have to push, but it'll get there eventually. Hack is kind of a cool thing. This is something we just sort of started working on about a year ago. And we've got the basic pieces for it out in the official version of the language. This is basically strict typing for everything. You declare a property, you declare an argument to a function, a return type. You can say this function wants a string, it optionally wants an integer, but this can still be null, and it's going to return a bool. Now, for development time, this is really cool because it allows you to do static analysis and say, hey, you're calling this function wrong. For runtime, we're eventually going to use some of this data, plug it into that pre-analysis phase and get a few extra % win out of the performance because we know this function's always returning a bool. We don't have to worry about the case where it's not. We've got a debugger. This is basically GDB for PHP. It kind of fills the niche provided by Xdebug because we've got breakpoints as watches, macro expansions. You can attach it to a running server. Basically, like I say, it's a replacement for Xdebug, really. But it also integrates with this web-based IDE that we've built. This does all the things you expect from an IDE, but it, again, attaches to your running server so you can get all the breakpoints and everything, watches. Cross-reference, right-click on a function call, that'll tell you where it's defined. If you start typing something out, say $A arrow, and A happens to be an object of class MySQLi, you'll have query, prepare, execute, all of them listed out as possible functions to call, what their parameters are. Integration to get, it's pretty cool. These are some handy links. How fast did I go? Oh, wow, I have a lot of time left. I hope you have a lot of questions. Otherwise, I can just keep talking randomly about other facets of the language. Come on, don't be shy.
If you're moving Apache out of the stack, can you do things like rewrites and all that sort of thing?
Yes. So the question is, if Apache is moved out of the stack, can we do things like rewrites and some of the other things that you expect to be able to do in Apache? Yes. There is a, do I have an example of it? I don't think I have an example on any slide I have available to me right now, but I'm actually doing that on the WordPress site that we're running. There's a little quirk between how HipHop and how Apache handle default documents in a directory. So I'm basically just throwing in a rewrite rule to mimic Apache's behavior. And it does exactly what you would expect it to.
Yeah, the C++ versions, I think, used to do some static analysis. HHVM.
Yes. So the question is, the HPHPC, the C++ translator, used to do static analysis and give you a nice output of like what's going on in this program, how do things connect together, and the question was, does HHVM still do that? Yes. If you look back at, or was that not the question? Sorry, I heard somebody say no over there. If you look back at this slide, we've got this -- HPHP switch on here that's basically saying, yeah, I'm running HHVM, but I want you to start acting like HPHP. A lot of the core pieces of HPHPC are staying in, and stuff like static analysis is one of them. So you can do like the linting and the analysis and things like that, and it'll still kick out. So if you're using HPHPC right now to do that, just run HPHP --HHVM, done.
A few slides before the end, you had a vector in
Ah, you saw that, huh?
Yeah, I've never seen that before.
Oop, no, I went too far. Hold on. My mouse doesn't work in my laptop, so I have to do it this way. Where did that slide go? Did I miss?
vector in...
Oh, yeah, in the parameter, right. That's where it was. So a few slides before this one, I mentioned collection literals. This is an example of a collection literal, and it's using that generic syntax. So vector is the class. Int is the specialization of the vector class. Like I said, it's very similar to C++ templates. What this means internally is that vector says, okay, my storage has to be some way of representing multiple ints. In practice, this is actually just an int star, it's a literal C vector. In practice, how your class chooses to implement that can be, whatever it is. This is one of the features that are HipHop specific, and we intend to make an offer to the PHP community with a patch to do this, because we don't want the languages to diverge. We're just not quite at the point where this API is stable completely yet, so we're making a few changes yet. Yeah. And that is something I want to underline. It's like, we're not interested in dividing the language. We're trying to bring it together. That's why we are committed to bringing our side of the parity equation up during the next 2 months, and putting those patches out to the internals list and saying, okay, you may or may not want this feature, but here it is, and it's up to everyone to vote on whether they want that feature in regular PHP or not. And if not, then we've done our due diligence, and the languages will not quite match on that particular thing.
Make an extension?
So that is the second option, particularly for something like this. We can actually do some fancy things with extensions, basically, particularly for Hack. We are actually talking about initially doing our release as an extension before we even offer it as a language patch. Not sure how we're going to do that yet. But yeah, we could throw it into the compile file hook, say, read it in, either drop these hints entirely or translate them into some other type of knowledge about the type, and then pass the resulting text to the real compiler as though it were magically in a PHP compatible format. That's sub-ideal, obviously, because it requires maintenance and nobody really likes to maintain stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
What version of PHP is it 500% faster than specifically? And also timescale on namespaces, like rough timescale.
That's a really fair question, and that was part of the asterisk that I didn't explicitly call out. This is compared to the last version of PHP that we were actually able to test against, because of course our code base has moved on as well. So it's relative to 5.2. I want to say 5, but I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, PHP has made some performance gains in those times, so that number is going to be shrunk down because of that as well. I think in practice, it's probably only about 200%. Again, only. 5.3 and 5.4 in particular did make some great performance gains. Over in the corner there.
Hi. We've got a lot of PHP CLI scripts processing items off a work queue. So we were just wondering whether the HipHop engine can be used for those kind of scripts as well, which doesn't actually run via a web server. Yeah,
absolutely. This HHVM binary here that you use to run the web server and to do the pre-analysis, it is also a CLI server. So you would just say HHVM space, your script name, any arguments you need to your script, and it's just going to run it just like the PHP one will. I'll say just like it, again with an asterisk. We don't have the -r option, for example, so you can't just say php-r echo foo. That's not going to work on HHVM. It's on my to-do list of things to make better, because I use that all the time with regular PHP, and I really like it. So I'm going to get those matched up as much as possible this year sometime. It's low on the priority list, though, to be honest.
In terms of database connections, obviously I assume MySQL is in there.
Yes.
Do you have any NoSQL as part of it natively, or would it have to be, obviously in PHP, NoSQL kind of sucks in terms of...
Yeah. So the question was about database support. And MySQL, absolutely, or MySQL if you prefer. Definitely support that because we use it extensively. Memcached, if you want to call that a database. SQLite, OCI, the Oracle database, the PDO layer on top of those, obviously. And I think that's the extent of our database support right now, because those are the ones we use internally, so those are the ones we care about the most. We are going to throw support for other databases in there, NoSQL databases as well. That's just a question of time and getting somebody to work on it.
So you still use MySQL?
Yeah. And we are going to do the other MySQL drivers as well, like the MySQLi and stuff like that. Although we don't have it yet because nobody needs to use it. But with 5.5 deprecating MySQL, might be a good time to do that. All right. Anything else? Oh.
Namespaces, like rough time.
I don't want to promise it, but that's like at the top of my list. That has been the bane of my existence for the past couple of months. Someone, possibly me, is going to make namespaces work. I know Alexandrescu, the guy behind the D language, he's mentioned he wants to work on that, so he may be the one who does it. In a perfect world, I want to say it'll be ready by April, but I'm not going to promise that. So definitely namespaces.
Yeah, I really like the sort of server model and the features and the performance. And so I'd like to be able to use this like in my everyday use. And it seems like
I'd like to be able to get the feedback.
Sorry, and I was thinking like because of its attributes, like the other users who would be really keen on pushing this, I guess, would be other big PHP sites, like I guess Wikipedia and Automatic.
Mm-hmm. We're talking to Wikimedia, as a matter of fact, yeah.
Are they keen to use this sort of stuff and to help support it, or are you? So
it's a mixed feeling. Like you use Wikimedia as an example, so I'll talk about them. They have kind of mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, it does mean a lot fewer servers that they'll need to run to get the same performance. On the other hand, their 90% use case are reads, which are darn near static files. So they are not going to see a huge performance win on the read side. What they're going to see is a performance win on the write side, which is only a small percentage of their traffic. So in looking at their cost benefit, they're like, how much do we have to invest in making our site work on this other version of PHP, and how much of a gain are we going to get out of it? They're definitely watching it, but right now they're kind of on the cost benefit side of, don't mess with something that works. So.
Maybe the WordPress piece.
So yeah, WordPress we're also talking to, and it's a different story with WordPress. WordPress could theoretically have the same kind of picture where reads are, a lower portion. Like it's certainly the picture Facebook has. Reads are a lower portion of our traffic as well. But WordPress's code is mature. Is the nicest way I can say that. And so even on the read side, they're doing a lot of database stuff. They're doing a lot of extra work that they don't necessarily need to do. And that's why you'll actually see a more significant improvement on executing PHP code because there's more PHP code to run. It would be an even more impressive improvement if their databases were properly tuned to deal with reads, but they're not. I'm just going to take a drink of water right now. This is my idea of water. So the other half of your question, sorry. How closely are they looking at us? WordPress has got a different problem in the number of modules that they support. WordPress out of the box will just run for basic WordPress. But if you've got 100 different plugins installed, one of those may depend on an extension that is not supported. So they're a little worried about saying, okay, we're going to move this cluster over to HipHop until they can at least say HipHop supports 90% of bundled extensions. So they can say the odds of a plugin not working are going to be fairly low, and we can just move forward. That's kind of where they're at right now. And that's why parity is such a big deal. All right. No one else? Okay. What else can I just sort of throw in here about HipHop? Well, actually, let me ask you. Who, after hearing what you've just heard, is interested in going home and trying out your site with HipHop, seeing how it runs? All right, there's some interest. That's a lot of interest, that's fantastic. Who thinks your site would actually benefit from it more than the work would be worth? Who actually wants to talk about that at all? Like, talk about what sort of site you're running, how many servers you've got, anything like that? No, that's okay. That's okay. I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Sara, I'm really curious if we'll compile Magento.
Haven't tried it. You want to try it out in the hack area? Yeah, I got plenty of VMs I got access to.
So what was the question?
The question was, will it run? Actually didn't hear what you asked. If it would run. Magento. Will it run Magento? If anyone wants to join us out in the hack area, we'll try installing Magento. We'll see if it works. If you have got some questions, you can go to the official page. That's fb.me/hphp, or you can just bug me on Twitter, honestly.
Yeah, hi. Another question on compatibility. Have you tried it on the performance improvement, things like Drupal or Zend or any of those frameworks?
So Drupal, I know it doesn't work with right now. It uses some specialized stream features, so I've been busy catching those things up. So I haven't been able to do an actual performance comparison on Drupal. I haven't looked at Zend at all because Zend is, it's a framework, it's not an application. Like, I would need something to actually run. Maybe your test suite would be a good thing to use. Maybe not, because it's all contrived. I have looked at WordPress extensively. Like I said, that was just sort of my initial, here's an application that runs quite a few of the PHP websites out there. How does this one perform? The bottom end of the performance gain is 70%. The top end of the performance gain is 180%. There's a bunch of variables that determine kind of where you land in that, not least of which is the machine itself. But that's roughly where we end up landing on that one.
And the FB IDE, is that something that other people can install, or is that purely internal for Facebook?
We're open sourcing that soon. That is in development. We're kind of working out some of the rough edges on it. The type ahead isn't working perfectly yet, and there's a few times when you're shared editing between two different people where the update just isn't happening fast enough. But that will be open sourced. I didn't mention it supports all your Vim and Emacs key bindings, so if you're used to your editors, that should just work.
It'd be cool to see more of that, because that's something I'm definitely interested in.
I'm totally looking forward to pushing that out to GitHub. That's going to be a fun one.
One more question. Do you support Thrift, or does Facebook use Thrift?
Do we use Thrift? We use Thrift extensively. It is all over our architecture, and yes, it's actually one of the bundled extensions that is included with HipHop.
Within the total stack, how much gain has Facebook seen, including database and everything for an entire request?
So the question was, within the entire stack, what kind of gains have we seen overall? I don't have an answer to that. My sort of focus has been specifically on the HPHP portion of it. God, could I even make a guess? I know that every layer of the stack has been tuned like mad. Our data access layer is frightening in how quickly it gets data moved around, especially between colos. I honestly couldn't give you a number there. I just don't have access to one. I can find out.
So I've got a bit of a horrible question, but it seems that
please.
Maybe in the early days of Facebook, if somebody knew just how big it was going to be, they may not have chosen PHP. Having done so, you've done a great job with this, but if you said, okay, well, it's either use this and improve my PHP, or actually I should just pick something like Python, which I probably shouldn't say in this conference, but...
Well, Python didn't exist at the time, so...
Yeah, no, but for someone like me coming in here and thinking, well, I could use this and I could improve what I already have, or my next project, I should just say, well, if I need performance, maybe PHP isn't the way to go.
So that's a good question. Let's imagine ourselves there. So we say we have a website that we're going to throw together. We know that in 5 years we're going to have 1 billion users hitting it. Well, okay, not 5. 7 years, whatever. And I've lost audio. So I'll talk loud. Oh, I'm on a kid switch. I haven't changed my pockets. Should I do that? That. There we go. Sorry, that was me. So let's say, I was trying to dodge your question. Let's say we've got an idea for a site. We know that in 7 years we're going to have 1 billion users because we made some Faustian deal with the devil. What do we do? Where do we start? And how do we decide what we're going to use? That is a ridiculously subjective question. But I would still, personally, I would still go with PHP of some sort. I might go with regular Zen PHP at this point because there have been some performance improvements. I probably would go with HipHop because I think there is a lot more room to make that better than there is on PHP. Some people in the audience will disagree with me on that one, and we can argue about it over a beer. Would I go with a different language? Probably not, because PHP was a language designed for the web that has been adapted to other purposes. Pretty much every other language out there was designed for other purposes and adapted to the web. That's kind of a philosophical standpoint, and we can definitely argue that one over some beers. But that's a subjective question with a subjective answer.
Facebook's the top most popular site, the second most popular site being Golemon, which is also in PHP.
I actually didn't know that.
They actually switched to a modified version of Nginx as their server rather than Apache.
Okay.
Obviously, you've never. Sorry,
other people can't.
No worries. So obviously, yeah, Teobo's second largest site. Obviously, you've never heard of them. I was actually going to say, have you ever spoken to them about it? Because they obviously.
I should.
As much as, well, not quite as much as Facebook, but close to.
Yeah.
Did you ever consider actually switching to alternative versions of servers like Nginx and that kind of stuff?
So that was, well, there's a few layers to that question, and I just want to throw in what the beginning of what was, and that is, okay, so the basically top 2 most visited websites, we've got these PHP run sites that are struggling with performance and parallel, being able to scale horizontally. Facebook's taken one approach. Teobeo, you said?
Yeah, Teobeo.
Okay. They have replaced their server components, but PHP is still PHP. And have we talked to them about that at all? Which obviously no, I haven't because I'm not aware of them. And the other part of that question was, help me out. Oh, did we consider Nginx or other components to sit underneath our stack? We considered them very briefly. The feeling was we're going to have to interface to something. What's the lightest weight thing that we can interface to? And that's why we grabbed libevent. We're regretting that now, to be honest. That's why we're expanding out our SAPI layer so that we can plug into things like Nginx and ProxyGen, which is another internal project that we're going to be open sourcing shortly, and Apache 2 and Fast CGI and things like that. We are definitely switching off of libevent internally once we have some of those pieces sorted out, most likely to ProxyGen, again, because there's a little bit of not invented here mentality at any company, and Facebook's not immune to that. Also, we use it in other points in our stack for our proxy servers and other things like that, so it makes sense to have a single architecture all around. I don't think we're actually talking about Nginx as a possibility for that at this point. And I'm running over at this point, right? Yeah, all right. Just 1 minute, come on. All right, thank you.